Spider-Man actually has quite a long list of canceled movies, which is kind of strange because he's actually fared a lot better in the movies over the years than many other superheroes, with several films having been made about him at the time of recording, and many more going to be made in the future. However, the first Spider-Man movie was actually never meant to be the first Spider-Man movie. There was actually another Spider-Man movie in active development a whole decade earlier, which actually would have been directed by James Cameron. Yeah, the James Cameron behind Aliens, the Terminator movies, Avatar, Titanic, yeah, that James Cameron. And he was hot off the success of Terminator 2 when he was going to make it. So what if this movie had actually happened? What if the lawsuit that ultimately led to the project getting bought out by Sony just never happened? Simply put, what if James Cameron's Spider-Man was made? So James Cameron, I should mention, is a huge Spider-Man fan, and he was absolutely jumping at the opportunity to direct a Spider-Man movie. Now, this movie would have been made in the early 1990s, and it would have been his first movie that he directed after Terminator 2. This movie would have, of course, focused on Peter Parker's origins. So now, the movie's cast has been hotly debated because nothing was ever fully set in stone. The movie actually never got past the drafting stage, so there was never any costume fittings or auditions or anything like that. But as far as the cast is concerned, what I've heard was that it might have starred Leonardo DiCaprio as Spider-Man, Robin Lively as Mary Jane Watson, Maggie Smith as Aunt May, R. Lee Ermey as J. Jonah Jameson, Michael Biehn as the Sandman, and Lance Henriksen as Electro. Now, there were also rumors of Arnold Schwarzenegger playing Dr. Octopus, but he actually didn't feature in the script that I read, so I'm going to be ignoring that for the sake of this video. So now this movie would of course focus on Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man. In this movie he would be a very nerdy teenage boy in high school, and unfortunately he's not completely over the deaths of his parents, who died when he was only 6 years old in a plane crash. And no, don't worry, there's no secret spy thing like they did in the TASM movies. That's nowhere in the script, don't worry about it. So now, of course, he would be raised by Uncle Ben and Aunt May, and he does have a faraway crush on Mary Jane Watson, but unfortunately for him, she's already dating Flash Thompson. So now, Peter is very self-conscious about his appearance, and he does get bullied quite a bit, but despite all that, he does very well in school, and he gets top marks in all of his classes, so he's very intelligent at the very least. Ultimately, he does gain his Spider-Man abilities pretty much the exact same way that he ended up getting them in the Sam Raimi movie, and like that movie, he also would have had organic web shooters rather than the technological web shooters that he has in every other version. So now, Peter would struggle initially with using his powers responsibly, and would at first be using them just to get petty revenge on Flash Thompson for years of bullying and to make appearances on TV. And he was actually going to have his own little TV show where he would come up with a Spider-Man name and do high-risk stunts for the sake of ratings. So now things are really starting to go Peter's way. I mean, he's making a great first impression on the public as Spider-Man. He's feeling stronger than ever. He's doing great in school, and he even gets partnered up with Mary Jane for a science project. And she actually takes the time to get to know him better. She even breaks up with Flash Thompson. So now Peter actually does request to do a report on spiders because secretly he wants to know more about his powers. And so now together, he and Mary Jane begin to develop a proper attraction for one another. It's not this far-away attraction anymore. They're genuinely getting into each other now. So now, one night while he's swinging around New York, he actually saves a wife from her abusive husband. And he feels this great sense of pride and accomplishment that he's never ever felt before. He's finally found his calling in life, and he decides to become the version of Spider-Man that we all know and love. He thinks Spider-Man shouldn't be limited to just being a TV attraction. He could do some genuine good. So he decides to take up crime fighting. And so meanwhile, a former criminal named Carlton Strand actually managed to gain electrical abilities after being struck by a bolt of lightning, and he becomes Electro. He actually uses his electrical powers to increase his income in his bank account, and so he becomes a rich businessman with a man named Boyd as his henchman. And so now over time, he does develop this sense of being the next stage in human evolution. He develops this superiority complex. He believes that having powers is something that makes him a better human being overall, and he actually helps to turn Boyd into the Sandman. So now he wants to convince Spider-Man to join up with them and just be this group of superpowered human beings that are above the rest of mankind. And so he's making the effort to try and seek Spider-Man out. So now while all this is going on, Peter's TV agent actually stiffs him on his pay for his own show. And so when he followingly gets robbed, Peter actually lets it happen. It's only then, unfortunately, that he discovers that the man who robbed the TV station, he killed Uncle Ben and stole his car to make a quick getaway, just like what happened in the actual movie. And so now a major difference, though, is that when Peter captures the carjacker, he almost kills him. But then he remembers what Uncle Ben taught him about how with great power comes great responsibility. And so he decides to spare the man and arrest him instead. And so now Spider-Man soon after this ends up getting his ass kicked by the newly created Sandman in a fight, but he ultimately does escape with his life. So now Peter starts to become overwhelmed by his new responsibilities as Spider-Man, and he starts to become a bit more aggressive with criminals than he used to be. And so now the city starts to turn on him a little bit, and this is only further spurred by J. Jonah Jameson, who in this timeline is a TV executive instead of an editor-in-chief. And of course, he still hates Spider-Man. I mean, when the hell has he ever not hated Spider-Man in any adaptation, really? And so now one night, Spider-Man actually rescues Mary Jane from a group of muggers, and she kisses him in repayment, possibly the upside-down kiss, I'm not sure. But either way, this does begin her attraction towards Spider-Man, while she's also dealing with her attraction for Peter. So now Spider-Man once again gets beaten up during a fight, but this time it's by Electro. And now Electro basically does what Green Goblin did in the actual movie. He tries to convince Spider-Man to join their team of advanced human beings, but of course Spider-Man says no. And so Carlton starts actually funding an anti-Spider-Man media initiative, which I'm sure would go along great with J. Jonah Jameson's. And so now Spider-Man and Mary Jane, they actually continue meeting up with each other, and one night they take a romantic swing over the streets of New York, reminiscent of that of Superman and Lois Lane from Superman the movie. And now this ends with them having a moment on top of the Brooklyn Bridge. And okay, now some sources say that this was going to be a full-on rated R sex scene, while others say it was just going to be something innocent, like a kiss, but regardless, it was going to be quite romantic. Unfortunately, though, the night does end very badly when she ends up being captured by Electro. So now the city blames Spider-Man, who they think kidnapped MJ, because by this point, Electro and J. Jonah Jameson have already turned everybody against Spider-Man. So then when they hear Spider-Man was involved in Mary Jane's kidnapping, they immediately blame him for it. So now either way, Spider-Man actually has to deal and confront all the hatred going his way, and he does so successfully. So he manages to track Mary Jane down to the top of the World Trade Center, where he and Electro have an epic fight with each other. I'm talking like Terminator 2 helicopter chase levels of epic. Now, in the end, Spider-Man actually manages to defeat Electro by tackling him off the side of the towers, hurling to his death below. It's also in this moment that MJ discovers that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And so now the movie ends with the two of them being accepted to different colleges, unfortunately, and agreeing to continue a long-distance relationship at the very least. And that is what James Cameron's Spider-Man was going to be. So now, would this movie have worked? Honestly, it's kind of hard to say because basically, you might have noticed, and I did point this out a couple of times, most of this movie is what we would end up getting in Sam Raimi's Tobey Maguire-led Spider-Man in 2002. There are a lot of differences, don't get me wrong, like obviously there's no Harry Osborn, Green Goblin's not the main villain, things are different. But there's quite a lot of things that are pretty similar or full on just the same. I mean, he gets his powers while he's on a field trip by being bit by a spider, just like in the Tobey Maguire one. Mary Jane ends up being the damsel at the end, just like in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. There's being saving Mary Jane from muggers and doing the upside down kiss possibly, which again, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. So yeah, there's quite a lot of things in this movie that we ended up getting, and the 2002 version proved that it can work, that you can do a movie with those kind of things in it and it'll still be really fucking good. So honestly, for that reason, I would say yeah, it could work. And now of course you have James Cameron behind the camera, and if there's anything that people should learn about James Cameron, it's that you cannot doubt this guy. Every time you say he can't do something, he proves us wrong. Oh, you can't make the Terminator work, makes the Terminator work. Oh, you can't do a sequel to Alien and make it any better, does a sequel that's arguably better than Alien. Oh, you can't make a movie that's underwater and have it be interesting, makes The Abyss and is really good and very underrated. Oh, you can't make a sequel to Terminator that's better than the first, makes one that's arguably better than the first. So yeah, in my opinion, people should just stop saying James Cameron can't do stuff. All right, it's just a bad idea. So yeah, I think with James Cameron at the helm, this movie already has a lot of potential. Combined with the fact that James Cameron was a huge Spider-Man fan, and the script that he wrote, or the draft that he wrote up, Stan Lee read it and said that he absolutely loved it. He was enthralled by it, which obviously is a very good sign. Now, as far as the cast goes, Leonardo DiCaprio as Spider-Man sounds like a match made in heaven, in my opinion. I mean, I've asked around for a couple of people about their opinions on this, and a couple of people said that they couldn't see it because they didn't think he was built enough. But I mean, I think that's kind of the charm, is that Spider-Man is on the smaller side because he's not going to be fucking gigantic like the Hulk or something like that, or Thor. I think that's kind of his charm. And yeah, I can imagine some people saying that he couldn't do nerdy Peter Parker, that he's too good looking. Similar to what Andrew Garfield had later, where they basically didn't even try to do the nerdy Peter Parker with him because he was just too good looking for that. But honestly, Leonardo DiCaprio can do fucking anything, in my opinion. He is an absolute chameleon. He can do absolutely any genre or any kind of character you want him to do. And honestly, I think if they really asked him to play a nerd, he could pull it off. I really do think that they could do that if they really tried. As far as the visual effects go, I do think that this movie would have held up. Because Terminator 2's special effects were so goddamn ahead of their time, and they still, for the most part, look absolutely incredible decades later. So yeah, I do think that he would make a Spider-Man movie that would hold up very well, visual effects-wise. The rest of the cast also sounds really good. I think Robin Lively could have made a great Mary Jane. She really does carry that girl next door quality, and I really liked her performance actually in Karate Kid 3. I thought she gave a pretty underrated performance in that. And honestly, a bit of Mary Jane shines through in that performance. Watch Karate Kid 3 and tell me that you don't see a little bit of Mary Jane in there. Arnold Schwarzenegger is Doc Ock. As I said, he might not have been in it, but if he did play Doc Ock, I think he would have gotten the physicality down. But I do think as far as the nuance that the character is more known for, he would have not been able to do it. I don't think it would have been as bad as his performances like Mr. Freeze in Batman and Robin, but I do think it would have been too big of an actor for that role. I think that they should have, if they were going to do Doc Ock, it probably shouldn't have been him. Maybe modern Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's gotten better at acting, because this was back when Arnold Schwarzenegger was still mostly just a physical actor and didn't really have the acting chops yet, debatably. So, and Lance Henriksen as Electro, I think that sounds great. Michael Biehn as Sandman, I don't know about that. I mean, when I think of Sandman, I think of somebody a little bit bulkier than that. But I mean, he could get ripped. He had been ripped in most of his movies by that point. So I mean, he could get that down. He definitely has that gruffness I think you could expect from a criminal. But he does seem a little bit too recognizable to just play a henchman character. So I don't know if that aspect of it would have worked, admittedly. Maggie Smith as Aunt May sounds perfect. Oh my god, I could imagine her bringing so much warmth to that character, like Rosemary Harris would end up doing, like Sally Field. pretty much every actress who's ever played Aunt May has just been spot on, in my opinion. And Maggie Smith would have been yet another, no pun intended, amazing Aunt May. So yeah, overall, I do think that this sounds like it could have been a really good movie. And as far as the infamous, sex scene on the Brooklyn Bridge, if that was what they were going to do, I don't think it would have been that bad as long as they didn't show it. Like, if they did cutaways, I don't think it would have been that bad. Like, if the attraction had been there between the two actors and they had done a good job building it up, I don't think it would have been that bad. So that's just my personal opinion. I don't think it would have been that bad. But yeah, overall, I do think James Cameron's Spider-Man would have been fantastic. You can't doubt James Cameron, and this cast just sounds so damn good. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention R. Lee Ermey as J. Jonah Jameson. If I was to choose between two actors, J.K. Simmons and him, if J.K. Simmons couldn't do it, he would be my first choice. Seriously, think about him. Think about R. Lee Ermey as J. Jonah Jameson and tell me that doesn't sound absolutely perfect. The guy is known for screaming insults at people. That's what he was known for. Ever since Full Metal Jacket. I just think he would have been absolutely perfect as JJ. I really, really do. So yeah, just to summarize, I think James Cameron, great choice for director. I think the visual effects would have held up. I think the score probably would have been good. I think the cast sounds absolutely perfect. And I do think the world was ready for a Spider-Man movie in the 90s. I really, really do. And I do think as long as they justified some of the R-rated material, I wouldn't have minded this being R-rated. Although overall, I do think they probably could have just done PG-13, and nobody would have really minded. That's just my opinion, though. But anyway, guys, let me know in the comments down below what you think of James Cameron's Spider-Man. Would you have rather seen it than the Sam Raimi one? Personally, I'm glad we got the Sam Raimi one. But if you would have rather seen this, then please talk about it in the comments down below, as well as give me more what if recommendations. Please give this video a thumbs up and share with all of your friends and all your various social media platforms. And I will see all you guys in the next video.